Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
It is that time when you sit back, relax on a beautiful day and enjoy a Three Martini Lunch. I'm Chad Benson in for Greg Corombos. Be back next week. As always, Jim Garrity is here. We give you your good, your bad, your crazy. We start with the good today, Jim. The Wuhan lab. That whole craziness. Did we help create gain-of-function insanity? And are we going to be doing it in the future?
Yes. So the news that came out of no less than the Biden administration yesterday was the Department of Health and Human Services announcing it was suspending government funding for the EcoHealth Alliance, which is the nonprofit that oversaw the gain-of-function bat coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which the Chinese government insists had nothing to do with the outbreak of a coronavirus most similar to those found in bats, except that it had been somehow enhanced and was different and unique, never actually found in any bat in the wild. And that the pandemic started in Wuhan, just a bit down the street from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But hey, maybe all of that is a coincidence, and maybe this is just a natural evolution of bats. Still a little funny that it was never found in any bat anywhere else in the world. So yeah, the Department of Health and Human Services said they're suspending the funding. They said this is still this is a temporary suspension while they review this. It's not just the fact that this may have been, inadvertent or unexpected U.S. government funding of the research that could very well, in my opinion, almost certainly did lead to the COVID pandemic. It's that everyone involved at EcoHealth Alliance was pretty dishonest from the beginning, and from the start of the COVID pandemic, when it really took over and disrupted our lives in March 2020, and people started looking at the two labs, not just one. There was this one, and there's also the Wuhan CDC that were doing research on the kinds of coronaviruses found in bats. These places had been, funding and supporting and working in cooperation with these institutions, doing gain-of-function research, which is where you take an existing virus and you kind of run it through various processes to make it either more virulent, more contagious, or both. And lo and behold, in, late 2019, early 2020, I guess it was probably, November, December 2019, this virus emerges that is more virulent and more deadly than anything else we've seen out of bats. But hey, what are the odds? Could all be coincidence.
It could be, but we know it's not. It's interesting. I was telling my friends in November, December of 2019, I have a friend who does manufacturing, works over there, and he goes back and forth, and he's telling me, dude, there's something happening here. This place is a ghost town. They've shut everything down. They're telling us to get out of the country. It is something weird. And and I kept telling everybody, it's coming. Something's coming. They're like, no, it's not. I'm like, something is coming. This whole thing, though, somebody needs to be talked to for real. Like Peter Daszak, who runs the EcoHealth Alliance, where the Fauci stuff. We have to have a serious conversation because as far as I'm concerned, there hasn't been any real reckoning. And the games that were played along the way to protect everybody's butt, Jim, that should piss a lot of people off.
It should. And I kind of feel like this. Look, listeners probably know I did a lot of writing about this, the lab leak theory, and all the evidence that was, coincidental or was circumstantial evidence is the term I'm looking for. But it started stacking up. And at some point, the question is, does the circumstantial evidence get so high and the sequence of events that would have to occur for this to not be a lab leak, does it reach the point where it just becomes unbelievable that it could have been a natural spillover? And that's the conclusion I kind of came to. And I'm glad you shared that story, Chad, because there were a lot of people who had various stories of strange things happening in the Wuhan region in the closing months of 2019. There was this American couple that was on a river cruise, and the cruise basically said, we're not stopping in Wuhan, that, with very little explanation, and people describing, as you said, a ghost town or just like all kinds of strange behaviors. Reports of a dramatic increase in the number of cars in the parking lots of hospitals, indicating that there was maybe it's just coincidentally that they had a increased cold and flu season in that time. It's not, there are other viruses floating around besides COVID-19, but it certainly looked like the Chinese government and various Chinese health authorities knew that something was up before January, February 2020, when it really got on the world spotlight. So I have found writing, like every once in a while, I'll see a story like this suspension of funding for EcoHealth Alliance, and I'll think about, should I, dive into this again? And, it's May 2024. I think it's pretty clear that, the U.S. intelligence community came up with its, wait a minute, boss report. And I believe that was like 2 or 3 years ago. And that's the last Joe Biden ever said anything about the origin of COVID-19. Officially, we don't know. And I think there are a lot of people in the leadership of our country who are perfectly comfortable not knowing. They don't want to know. Because the day you find that smoking gun evidence that, yes, this is the result of a lab leak and the result of irresponsibility on the part of people in China, and that people in the U.S. were financing this, doing this in conjunction with the Chinese, who really should have been in the process to say, no, this kind of experimentation is too dangerous. This is much more likely to start a global pandemic than to provide us the answers to stop a global pandemic. You'd like to, that basically too many people are embarrassed by it. Too many people, look, there's an argument that the U.S. should, ban, and that really every country should ban gain-of-function research entirely, that the risks simply don't justify the gain in knowledge. And a whole bunch of the, microbiologist and virologist community is like, we can't do that. Can't do that. So I'm glad to see this news. I'm a little frustrated that it's May 2024 and we're coming to this conclusion. I'm hoping this is a permanent suspension of government funding for EcoHealth Alliance. Unfortunately, there are vast numbers of nonprofits who I think will be more than willing to step in and keep funding EcoHealth Alliance. So one of the great ironies is the people who are indirectly, but indisputably, have a hand in this disaster that befell the world. They're going to have the consequence that they're going to face is that they're going to have a brief inconvenience in the financing of their organization.
That's Jim Garrity, 3 Martini Lunch. I'm Chad Benson in for Greg Carumba. Let's go to the bad. Obviously, we're going to have a debate. Most likely, 2 of them. Did Trump get screwed?
Yeah, listeners to yesterday's podcast might remember, hey, wait a minute, Jim and Chad were saying this was the good one. And yes, I am glad that debates are occurring. I had a real concern. And look, until they happen, don't count your chickens until they hatch.
I keep saying that, man. I keep saying it. I'll believe when I say it.
Right, the idea that, Biden or Trump, I suppose, finds some excuse to back out saying, oh, I don't like the moderator, or oh, I don't like the format, or, But look, better that they have debates than that they don't have debates. And yesterday, Trump and Biden agree. But now, after a little bit of time to digest it, I think if you're pulling for Trump, this is a bad deal. And the reason is you have one that's going to happen next month, late June, about a week before July 4th holiday. It's summer. Americans are on vacation. I don't think Americans are really paying that much attention. It'll get attention. It'll get ratings. Don't get me wrong. But I just feel like by the time people start voting, that debate will seem like a long, long time ago. And I think it's, not at the time. And the next one is going to be September 10th. Actually, look it up, after the first week of the NFL season, about a week after Labor Day. The kids will be going back to school. It's not the worst possible time for a debate, but it's really early. And it's really early to have the last debate. The Trump campaign had argued, based on the original schedule put out by the Commission on Presidential Debates, saying, look, people start voting in September 20th, I believe is the date, here in Virginia, as well as Minnesota and South Dakota, and various other states start their early voting in the days and weeks after that. So their argument was that you can't have these debates too late because people have already started voting, which I think is a perfectly fair objection or concern. But if you end the debate September 10th, well, then I think, any bad debate for Biden is likely to be kind of forgotten by the time people start voting. Most of people still vote on Election Day. And people would say, Trump will call for more debates. Well, okay, but there were 2 debates in the 2020 cycle. There were supposed to be 3. Trump got COVID. Then they said the commission wanted to go virtual debates. Trump said he didn't want to do that, so he canceled. Then he turned around and said, I want to do it again. And the Biden campaign's like, nope, you canceled. And that's how it shook out. So I think what's going to happen is we'll have these 2 debates. They could go quite well for Trump. I think if Trump allows Biden to talk, Biden's mouth will get him in trouble. So it's entirely possible these go badly for Biden. But then I think Biden's going to say, okay, we did our 2 debates, we're done. And Trump's going to say, hey, we should do more. And, Biden will just kind of shrug and say, hey, we did 2 in 2020. We did 2 in 2024. Nobody's getting canceled. No, by the way, you refused to do any debates during the Republican primary, so you got plenty, Buster. And my sneaking suspicion is we only get 2 debates and they end very early. So if I'm Trump, that doesn't strike me as a good deal. If I'm Trump, I wanted, at least 3. And yes, it's good that they're starting kind of earlier than usual, but they also finish earlier than usual. And I think if you're Trump, you'd probably like to have Biden having a bad debate performance as close to November as possible. But I could be wrong, but I kind of feel like if we get only 2 debates, that's probably better for Biden than it is for Trump.
One of the things I talk about today on my show, Jim, is if I'm the Democrats, I want one before the convention. Because if he goes deer in headlights, has a moment, wanders off the stage, whatever, then there is a actual argument heading into the convention. We need to replace this guy. And we've got tape to show that it has to happen.
I've heard that, Chad, and there's a very solid logic to that. And I think Biden will probably be okay. I don't think he will have an unbelievable senior moment. Or something where the entire country believes that he's, got dementia or had a stroke or something. But that having been said, you hear Biden talking about his uncle being eaten by cannibals and, inflation was 9% when I went in and I used to drive a truck and all the stuff we were talking about earlier this week. It's conceivable Biden will have a very bad debate and that the talk about replacing him will increase before the convention. So yeah, it does give them that option. But I get the feeling this also is a sign that the Biden campaign just wanted to get these debates over with as soon as possible. And these negotiations, if that was their goal, these negotiations went very well for them.
Now let's head to the crazy. Speaking of the convention, Dean Phillips, let's not do a convention. I do worry because I think I'm going to the conventions, and I'm thinking to myself, man, this right now with Palestine, with all of this stuff, I'm not really worried about the Republicans because I don't think anybody's heading over there because everybody kind of has a sense of where the Republicans are. But the Democrats, this could be a giant mess.
Yeah. So Dean Phillips is, an interesting guy because he challenged Biden for the nomination. The primary challenge did not go well. Although I looked it up, he's got like more than 500,000 votes so far in this primary. So that's the good news. That's 500,000 more than you or me or almost anybody else. He has 0 delegates, which is not good. But I think Dean Phillips is interesting because he's the guy who will say what a decent number of Democrats are thinking, but are afraid to say out loud or in front of the television cameras. Dean Phillips has said, come on, we all know Biden is too old to serve another full term. Look, we know from polling numbers, a lot of Democrats feel this way, but nobody wants to say it. So if he says, why are we even having a convention? This thing is probably going to look like 1968. This thing is probably going to look like a disaster. Lots of bad optics, protesters clashing with police, possible disruptions, etc. Why are we even doing this? Let's just cancel it. I see where he's coming from. There is a logic to what he is putting out here. The problem is that the Republican message is Joe Biden's too old. He's too confused. He can't handle his duties anymore. He's too indecisive and he's terrified of the left. If you announce we're not holding the convention, that's basically saying the Republicans are completely correct about Biden. He cannot govern anymore. And oh, by the way, Chicago is now so ungovernable. It is so unsafe. We cannot, guarantee the safety of the president of the United States. So they won't do this. But I just think it's kind of interesting that Phillips is saying it. I think it's a reflection of the absolute spirit of dread in certain Democrats' minds right now as they contemplate the convention. We should also point out a major factor in this is that usually the mayor of the city hosting the convention desperately wants everything to run smoothly and has more than enough police presence. I too probably will be out in Chicago. I've covered every convention since the Republicans in Philadelphia in 2000. Usually there's almost every year, there's every cycle, there's a worry about, there's going to be protests, there's going to be violence. And then there's like 1 million cops in the streets and there are protests, but there's really very little violence and nothing that really disrupts the proceedings. it wouldn't shock me if we actually had that for both conventions this year, that if everything ran a little bit more smoothly than they're expecting. But the big difference is that Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, ran on abolish the police, said it wasn't just a slogan, it really was the way that he wanted, and that he is just this reflexive left-wing guy who is just resolutely anti-police. And, Democrats are genuinely worrying. With a mayor like this, does this mean we're actually going to have sufficient security, sufficient police presence on the streets, et cetera, et cetera? So I actually don't know if it's going to be as bad as Dean Phillips and the rest are worrying, but I do think it's interesting that they're having this conversation. And while I'm 99.9% certain that the convention is going to go on, the fact that Democrats really don't want to do it says a great deal about the state of their party at this current moment.
Indeed. And that would be crazy. He's Jim Garrity. I'm Chad Benson, in for Greg Columbus. He's back next week. We've given you the good, the bad, the crazy. You can reach out to me at Chad Benson Show. Check out my podcast as well, Chad Benson Show. And if they want to reach you, my man, what do they do?
At Jim Garrity on Twitter, also at National Review. I have a column in the Washington Post today about the debates that we just talked about. And when Greg comes back, I'll be promoting this relentlessly. But the Amazon page is up for my 4th novel in the Dangerous Click series entitled Dueling Six Demons. But you can just type in Jim Garrity at Amazon and it should pop up pretty quickly. So that's what I'm working on these days.
Right on. I appreciate it as always. We'll do it again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Chad.